All right, Deuteronomy 9. You know, maybe I'll just be sentimental for a second. I just love being with you guys on a Wednesday morning. This is like the highlight of 2013-14. Well, one of the highlights. I had another son last year. It's my son's first birthday today, my second son, little August. We had a great birthday party for him last night. It was so, 1-year-olds eating cake and stuff like that. It was great. Anyhow, but if I were to name some other highlights, this would be one of them, crawling through the Pentateuch with y'all on Wednesday mornings. It's been awesome. Okay, so big picture. We're in this section of the book of Deuteronomy. He's going to restate the terms of the covenant in the form of these laws to the second generation, right? Not the children of the Exodus generation. And so he knows what their parents were like, Moses does. And so he gives the backstory. Here's where we've been the last 40 years. And my goodness, just don't act like your parents. Don't act like your parents. And look at this opportunity that's in front of you to be in close covenant relationship with Yahweh, be shaped by his justice and generosity. And then these are also more, actually I should just write it in here. These are also more covenant sermons and some poetry. There's two beautiful poems at the end here in 32 and 33. So that's where we are. We're right, we're in the home stretch of the covenant sermons, chapter 9. Let's just go for it. We'll see what happens. Hear, listen, hear, Israel. You are now about to cross the Jordan to go in and dispossess nations greater and stronger than you, with large cities that have walls up to the sky. Their people are strong and tall, Anakites. So the NIV has, do you guys see that? Do you have that in probably not all translations? It's kind of funny. Here we go. And the NIV puts it this way: the people are strong and tall, Anakites. It was just a funny way of rendering it. So remember, this was the crew of people that the spies saw. These are these people who are unusually tall. And, the most famous of the Anakim is what they're called in Hebrew is, of course, Goliath. And this was an unusually large breed of human beings who were in the land. So they epitomize for the Israelites their fears in going into the land. So you know about them, and you've heard it said, "Sheesh, who can stand up against an Anakite, for goodness sakes?" But be assured. So what Moses doesn't say is like, you can take them, buck up, Israelites, no. He's like, you can't take them. In fact, the whole point is that you can't. But be assured today that Yahweh, your God, is one who goes across ahead of you like a devouring fire. He'll destroy them. He'll subdue them before you and drive them out and annihilate them quickly, as Yahweh, your God, has promised you. So we're kind of back to this theme that we were in a week ago and 2 weeks ago about this motif of driving out the Canaanites. And so we won't wrestle with the ethical issues there. We've done that a couple times before. But the important thing is, so look at those first few verses 1 through 3. If you're an Israelite hearing those words right there, you're an Israelite. You just heard God say those things to you. How are you feeling about yourself right now? Well, small, right? Because the Anakites, they're really big. But then at the same time, you hear verse 3, be assured Yahweh is your God, and He's gonna take care of these guys for you. And you could see how that could, Moses is being a pastor here. He's pastorally kind of heading them off at the pass once again to make sure that Yahweh's covenant commitment to them doesn't create a false sense of pride or self-security, or somehow like, oh, yes, that's right, that's because we're Yahweh's favorites and we're the best nation on the earth and so on. Because if military victory, still in our world, but especially in the ancient world, military victory was seen as evidence of divine favor or divine chosenness. And in this case, military victory is actually, despite the fact that God is constantly has shown favor to these people, but is constantly ticked off at them. Let's just read the passage. This will just make more sense. Verse 4. After Yahweh your God has driven them out before you, don't say to yourself, well, Yahweh brought me here to take possession of this land because we're so awesome, right? Because of my righteousness. And we've talked about this word before, but let's just do it again here because it's good. And it's a good New Testament word as well. So in Old Testament, the Hebrew word for righteousness is tzedek. And it's most basic. I think we think of righteousness primarily as like a legal term. It has to do with your legal standing in the court. And that's true. It's true in the Bible as well. Though if you look through all the ways that righteousness is used, it's a relational term, referring to rightness in relationship, in terms of like equity, fairness, and integrity. So you look at the kinds of people that are described as having tzedek in the Bible, and they're always people who are generous. In the Psalms or Job, he's described as a righteous man, and then you look at what he actually did, and yes, he followed the 10 Commandments, but what he highlights and his friends highlight is how generous to the poor he was. Job 31, for example. Or you read that someone who'd tzedek, in Psalm 1, is someone who's in right relationship with Yahweh. He immerses himself in Torah. It's really interesting. So it's not just about like being a good moral person. It's that you seek health and equity and rightness in all of your relationships. That's the basic concept. And so Yahweh is the ultimate righteous one, because he is always faithful and has integrity in all of his relationships. And you cannot say the same of most human beings, and definitely not the people of Israel, right? So don't say Yahweh brought us here because of our righteousness. What story is glaring in the back of our heads about Israel's lack of righteousness? This is key. Well, how do I draw this? I'm not even going to try and draw it right now. So it's Israel's fall narrative. If Genesis 3 to 11 is humanity's kind of fall story, what's Israel's fall story? So the golden calf story, Exodus 32 to 34, just get it in there. And so that showed that right at the making of the covenant, Israel showed themselves to be not righteous, not having integrity or equity in their relationship with Yahweh. So don't say to yourselves, we have military victory, therefore we must automatically be on right terms with Yahweh. He goes on. It's on account of the wickedness of these nations that Yahweh is going to drive them out before you. It is not because of your tzedek, your righteousness. And notice the word that's paired with it. Integrity, truthfulness. So it's not even so much morality, it's about a rightness, a straightness, a health and integrity in relationships. It's not because of your righteousness or integrity that you're going in to take possession of their land. Rather, on account of the wickedness of these nations, Yahweh, your God, will drive them out before you, to accomplish what he swore to your forefathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Understand, then, that it is not because How many times? We're going to say this out loud here. This is the third time. It is not because of your tzedek, your righteousness, that Yahweh your God is giving this good land to you to possess. Listen, you're a really stiff-necked people. So notice there's three reasons right here. Even we'll just pop them up here. This is really so. God has chosen a people in this case. This is where the entire biblical term of election comes from, and not in the sense that it came to take in the Reformation and Calvin and so on about election and predestination. That's a later debate in the church. In the Bible, the word elect just simply means to choose. And the base narrative of God choosing a people is God choosing Abraham and choosing the people of Israel. So why has God chosen Israel to be the people that, first of all, he's going to use to drive out the Canaanites here? Is it because of their righteousness? Right? So that's crystal clear, right? And so not because of their tzedek. And you could even elaborate this, because he goes on to say, listen, you're really stiff-necked. And then this rest of the chapter is recalling and retelling Israel's fall narrative, the golden calf story. It's a retelling of it. So it's not only is it not because of their tzedek, but it's actually despite their lack of tzedek. So not only does God not choose them for this reason, he chooses them. The whole point is that he chooses them despite their lack of tzedek. And that's a theme of God's choosing a people through whom he's going to rescue the world, is that it's his sheer freedom and grace to do so. But it's not the only reason given in this paragraph we just read. What's another reason? It's also repeated 3 times. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, so evil among the nations, or specifically among the Canaanites. Did you see that there? So this is the reason given among these particular 7 nations living in the land, is that they are characterized by an extreme degree of just moral degradation. And usually in the biblical narrative, it gets kind of epitomized in their worship rituals, namely ritual sex and orgies, and the sacrifice of children to their gods. Those are the ones that the prophets bring up the most as being the most glaring. And that's the way they worship their gods, not to mention their day-to-day social life. So God is on a mission to deal with evil among the Canaanites, or among the nations. And he's going to use a nation who lacks tzedek, but he's going to use this lacking tzedek nation to bring his justice on these Canaanites. And then what's the last reason? It's right at the end. There's another reason. Not because of your righteousness, because of the wickedness of the nations. And then look in verse 5. It's one underwriting theme right here. Do you see that there? You got the hit list of the 3 patriarchs right there. Covenant promise to Abe, Ike, and Jake. So why does God do what he does? Why does God choose the people? It's actually despite, the lack of qualifications. That's what we would call grace. It's evil among the Canaanites. That's what we would call Yahweh's passion for justice. And then his covenant promise to Abe, Ike, and Jake. I mean, in a way, that's actually what the Psalms will call Yahweh's tzedek. Yahweh's highest value is to maintain covenant integrity to these people that he's made promises to. And that's a sermon right there. Look at that. Thank you. You just helped me outline a sermon that I might preach one day. So anyway, that's the summary of election here. This is these covenant sermons are so rich, I think. They're very powerful. So what he's going to go on is to really emphasize this theme right here in the rest of the chapter. It's definitely not because of your righteousness. We said it 3 times. Let's consider that. What does he call them? He calls them a name here at the end of verse 6. Stiff-necked, which is a good Bibleese metaphor for like an animal that won't cooperate with you. So these are farming communities, right, and shepherding communities. So there's a lot of imagery in the Bible that comes out of that, and one of them is an animal that won't take a yoke. I don't know, won't turn cow, and it's stiff-necked, it won't turn or something. I think that's the idea. Anyway, so what's the great narrative illustration or example? It's Israel's fall narrative. Let's listen to Moses' retelling. Remember this, never forget how you provoked Yahweh your God to anger in the desert. From the day you left Egypt until you arrived here, you've been rebellious against Yahweh. Is there any nostalgia whatsoever here? None. At Horeb, remember Horeb's another name for Mount Sinai. At Horeb, you aroused Yahweh's wrath so that he was angry enough to destroy you. When I went up on the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant Yahweh made with you, remember the 10 words get inscribed on the tablets? I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I ate no bread and I drank no water. Yahweh gave me 2 stone tablets inscribed by the finger of God. It's so cool. On them were all the commandments Yahweh proclaimed to you on the mountain out of the fire on the day of the assembly. Now it's interesting, if you go read the story, in Exodus, what's on the tablets? How many commandments? 10. It's the 10 words. Now, there's a whole bunch of other laws given following the 10 Commandments, about like 70 or so. But the way he phrases it here, it's all of the commandments are those 10 words on the tablets. It's as if they are this summary or this epitome of what a life of tzedek with God and other humans looks like. The 10 Commandments. Verse 11. At the end of the 40 days and 40 nights, Yahweh gave me the 2 stone tablets of the covenant. Yahweh told me, go down from here at once, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. Notice he's already kind of passing the buck here. They have turned away quickly from what I've commanded them, and they have made a cast idol for themselves. Yahweh said to me, I've seen these people. They are stiff-necked people indeed. Leave me alone, so I can destroy them, blot out their name from under heaven, and I will make you into a nation stronger and more numerous than they. Now, let's just pause. Should we just read the whole thing and then reflect on it? It's tricky. This is one of the most important stories for also understanding the theology of prayer, I think, in the whole Bible. The whole story is all about the nature of Yahweh's will and his justice, and then his invitation to his covenant people to pray and to change his will, or at least to change how he's going to enact his will. So let's just make an observation right here. Verse 14. Does Moses have anything to gain right here? In verse 14. Leave me alone, wipe them out, I'll turn you into the big nation that I'll fulfill my promises through. Does Moses have anything to gain? Everything. And has he been particularly happy to be with these people for the last 40 years? No. This is his moment, I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but this is it. He's like, finally, my ship has arrived. What's that figure of speech? Your ship has come in. You know that one? It means like your golden opportunity or whatever. So if there is a moment, this is it. Now, look at the first words of verse 14 though. What does God say to Moses? Leave me alone. Now just stop and think about that. Now, in terms of what's happening in this story and the nature of God's will and intercessor and so on, if God just wanted to enact his justice, could he have, without talking to Moses at all? Yes. And would he have been unjust after all that they've been through and so on to bring his full justice on the people of Israel? At least in the framework of the story, it might, for some of us, kind of be like, well, it is kind of intense to wipe them all out. But in the framework of the story, it's set up that would be just for Yahweh to do. So what is God doing? Why does he even bring this up to Moses in the first place? Why does he even say to Moses, leave me alone? If he didn't want Moses to somehow not leave him alone. Does that make sense? I mean, just really, really think about this. Leave me alone. Here's what I'm going to do. And then the whole story is about how Moses does not leave God alone. He doesn't do what God says that he's going to do. So let that frame the story. Let's actually read through Moses' retelling, and then we'll make some reflections here. So I turned, and I went down from the mountain while it was blazing with fire. And the 2 tablets of the covenant, they were in my hands. And when I looked, I saw that you all had sinned against Yahweh your God. You had made for yourselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. You had turned aside quickly from the way Yahweh had commanded you. So I took the 2 tablets and threw them out of my hands, breaking them into pieces before your eyes. So he didn't trip and drop them, right? So he's intentionally breaking them. And we've been told like 4 times now, these are the tablets of what? Tablets of the covenant. These tablets summarize the terms of the covenant relationship. And they've, in the presence of God himself, broken the 2 first commands. Don't have any other gods before me, and don't try and represent me with idols. And so what's he doing symbolically here? Right, he's enacting what they have just done to the relationship. They've just shattered the relationship. Let's keep going. Verse 18. Then once again, I fell prostrate before Yahweh 40 days, 40 nights. Is he leaving Yahweh alone? No. I ate no bread, drank no water, because of all the sin you had committed, doing what was evil in Yahweh's sight, provoking him to anger. I feared the anger and wrath of Yahweh. Now, let's at least just to put a little statement in front of you that's been enormously helpful. Yahweh's, so we'll say, God's anger and wrath, whenever you read these terms, think through, there's an emotional component. He has passion for his good world, and so if somebody messes and ruins and vandalizes God's good world, if somebody vandalizes like your car, and you really love it and just gave it a nice paint job or something, that's a dumb illustration, sorry, just came to me. So let's think of something, whatever, if you just planted a garden in your front yard and, it's summer and, idle hands or the devils, whatever, or something, and high schoolers who have nothing to do in the summertime come through and they shred your flowers, what's going to happen in you? Right? Anger and wrath. And it's not because you're a jerk or just because you're volatile, or just prone to anger. The whole point is that it ignites passion in you because you're protecting something good. And so, Yahweh's anger and his wrath, if you look at the stories where Yahweh gets angry and wrathful, it's never arbitrary. Zeus or Apollos or Baal, the gods of Canaan, they'll just throw lightning at you because they woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Never with Yahweh. You always know where you stand with Yahweh. If you're experiencing his anger and its wrath, it's because, as a covenant people, in terms of the story, we've done expressly what he told us not to do. That's the whole point. And so it's God's anger and wrath, it's about his justice driven from his passion to preserve goodness. And if you look at every story where Yahweh gets anger or wrath, there's this kind of theme going on. It's been a very helpful concept for me in reading the stories, especially in the Old Testament. So I feared Yahweh's anger and wrath because he was justly angry enough to destroy you. But again, what did Yahweh do? 40 days, 40 nights, I lay prostrate praying for you, and what did Yahweh do? He listened to me. Yahweh was angry enough with Aaron to destroy him. So at that time I prayed for Aaron too. This is the high priest. He's like the person who symbolically is supposed to mediate between Yahweh and the people. And he is the one at the center of the golden calf story. And so I prayed for you, I prayed for Aaron. Yahweh said, leave me alone, but then I prayed, and he listened to me. I also took that sinful thing of yours, the calf you had made. I burned it in the fire, I crushed it, ground it to powder, fine as dust, and threw it into the stream that flowed down the mountain. Took the created thing that you made into a god and reduced it back and put it back into the process of creation, a stream going down the mountain. Now, just to remind you, you had repeats of this incident. You also made Yahweh angry at Taverah, Numbers 11, at Massah, Exodus 17, Kivroth HaTa'avah, Numbers 11, and when Yahweh sent you out from Kadesh Barnea, Numbers chapter 14. And when I said, go up and take possession of the land I've given you. But you rebelled against the command of Yahweh your God. You did not trust him. Does anybody have you did not believe in him? You did not believe in him. This is the same phrase. It's a rare word in the Pentateuch. It's exactly the first time it was ever used in the Bible is of Abraham. In Genesis 15, he believed in God, and God credited it to Abraham as tzedek, as righteousness. Yeah. But you have not ever done that. Therefore, you've not obeyed him. You've been rebellious against Yahweh, your God, ever since I've known you. He's going to summarize it here. So I lay prostrate before Yahweh those 40 days and 40 nights. Yahweh said he's going to bring his justice on you, destroy you. So I prayed to Yahweh. And here we get his prayer. Oh, sovereign Yahweh, don't destroy your people. Now, what did God say to Moses? Your people whom you brought out. And Moses says, no. Remember, these are your people, your own inheritance, whom you redeemed by your great power and brought up out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Now look at the shape of his prayer. We're getting his intercessory prayer. Here's what he wants him to do to show mercy. Why? Why should Yahweh show mercy? And we already know why. Verse 27. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. What's he saying here? Right here. Remember your covenant promises. He names that first. He knows that Yahweh's integrity to his covenant promises is the highest value that Yahweh holds. So remember, overlook the stubbornness of this people, their wickedness and their sin. Otherwise, here's the second reason, the country from which you brought us will say, what's the country from which you brought us? Egypt. They'll say, because Yahweh wasn't able to take them into the land he promised them, and because he hated them, he brought them out to put them to death in the desert. But they are your people, your inheritance that you brought out by your great power and by your outstretched arm. So he highlights the covenant promise, and he highlights the fact that this is bad PR among the nations, so to speak, right? Because you made these promises and said you would do this, And this is now happening because of what you did at Egypt. Everybody's eyes are on this, international eyes are on this story. And you're going to, not fulfill your promises. That's not consistent with who you are. You don't want to do that. Keep going. At that time, Yahweh said to me, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones and come up to me on the mountain. Now, if we're chiseling new stone tablets, what does that mean in terms of what's happening? What is Moses' intercession been effective? Also make a wooden box, a chest or an ark. I'll write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke, and then you were to put them in the chest or in the ark. So I made the ark, and we know from the story in Exodus, of course, he commissioned 2 craftsmen to make the ark, but he's summarizing here. So I made the ark out of acacia wood, chiseled the 2 stone tablets like the first ones. I went up to the mountain with the tablets in my hands. Yahweh wrote on these tablets what he'd written before, the 10 words, 10 commandments that he proclaimed to you on the mountain, out of the fire. On the day of the assembly, Yahweh gave them to me, and I came back down the mountain and put the tablets in the ark I had made, and as Yahweh commanded me, and there they are right now. Now, the next couple verses, hang with me. We'll summarize this intercession prayer thing in a moment here. Verses 6 through 9 are there's this little paragraph that actually seem to have been some sort of supplement. They seem later than Moses by the perspective, as you can see here. Now, remember, the Israelites traveled from the wells of the Yaakanites to Moserah. There Aaron died and was buried, and Eleazar his son succeeded him as priest. From there they traveled to Gudgodah and on to Yotbatha, a land with streams of water. At that time, Yahweh set apart the tribes of Levi to carry the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, to stand before Yahweh, to minister, to pronounce blessings in his name, as they still do today. Did you catch that? It's this was way back then, but they're still doing that today. That's why the Levites have no share or inheritance among their brothers. Yahweh is their inheritance, as Yahweh your God told them. It's reflecting a perspective of being in the land, and the Levites are doing this, and this is why, and they're still doing it here today, and that's why here in the land they don't have an inheritance. It's an interesting little historical note, and I don't really want to focus on it, so let's keep going. Verse 10. Here's the intercession story brought to closure. Now, I stayed on the mountain 40 days and nights, as I did the first time, and Yahweh listened to me. At this time also, it was not his will to destroy you. Wait a minute. Was it Yahweh's will to destroy and visit justice on the people of Israel? Answer, well, yes, right? But then Moses intercedes, and he reminds Yahweh of covenant promises and bad PR among the nations. Yahweh listened to me, and then it was not his will to destroy you. And so you have Yahweh's justice, and then you have Yahweh's mercy, and then you have an intercessor in the middle. And what does the intercessor put right in front of Yahweh? Yahweh, you're the kind of God that keeps your covenant promises. That's who you are. And the whole thing is begun by this statement to Moses, leave me alone. This is really, okay, so let me just read a little, this is really insightful. This is by Christopher Wright, a commentator I'm reading. And about this story is exploring the paradox of prayer. Does prayer affect God? Does it only affect us? How does this all work out? That's what the story is exploring. So these really insightful comments by Christopher Wright. He says, the paradox here is that in appealing to God to change, Moses was actually appealing to God to be consistent. Do you see that? And that may be a significant clue to the dynamic of all genuine intercessory prayer. On both sides, it's vital to maintain the full seriousness of the words spoken and God's intentions expressed through them. I'm going to bring my justice. Otherwise, the whole encounter and the whole personal relationship with Yahweh and God loses credibility and integrity. However, there is a hint of the divine intention in these enigmatic words, "Leave me alone." As this one really awesome commentator, Brevard Childs, pointed out long ago, classic Jewish interpreters have always sensed a deep meaning in these words. Verse 14, "Leave me alone." After all, God need not have spoken these words to Moses, "Leave me alone." Indeed, he didn't need to say anything at all. Does God have any problem just shutting the door and not leaving any room for intercession or debate? So think about what happened to Moses. Think about what happened to Moses. Does Moses get to debate with God about what happened at the water and the rock? And maybe you could let me into the land after all. I mean, 3 times Moses brings it up, and God's just like, "No, dude, no, you lost your chance." So God doesn't invite Moses in, but this time he does, which means that's significant, that God's choosing to open himself to Moses' influence here. In his wrath, God could have acted immediately without consulting Moses at all. Yet just as God involved Abraham, consulting him prior to bringing his justice on Sodom and Gomorrah, do you remember that story? Where God invites Abraham, and every time, which is, well, okay, so different story. Keep going. That's the illustration. So here, God pauses and makes his divine will open to Moses' intercession. Can I keep going? Isn't it interesting? Okay. The fact is that far from human intercession being an irritating but occasionally successful intrusion into God's prefabricated blueprint on history. Isn't that a great way of putting it? He's saying, human intercession is not that. It is not an irritating but occasionally successful intrusion upon God's blueprint for history. The story shows that human intercession is an integral part of the way God's sovereignty in history is exercised. That doesn't totally solve the mystery, but it does put it in proper biblical perspective. This is how the Bible frames the idea of intercessory prayer. God not only allows human intercession, he invites it. He builds it into his decision-making processes in ways that we can never fathom. Concluding paragraph. Intercessory prayer, then, flows primarily not from human anxiety about God. Oh, God, if only, is God really going to be good and do this? Rather, it flows from God's commitment to right relationship with human beings. It reflects not just a dissonance between how things are and how we would like them to be, but to an even deeper dissonance in the heart of God over God's boundless love for an unlovely world, and God's covenant faithfulness to a covenantally unfaithful people. Moses was not arguing against God. He was participating in an argument within God's own self. Such prayer not only participates in the pain of God in history, but God is inviting his people to do so for the sake of our world. Isn't that profound? It's really profound. And I think that's true to the story. That's the whole point here. I think often when we get to certain theology topics, we step out of the biblical stories that raise the issues, and then we try and solve them through philosophy or something like that. And the Bible doesn't do that. It sets up, so you have God's justice. He's working according to a standard here. And his standard is not pure, naked justice. The highest value that Yahweh holds in this story is integrity to his covenant promises. And he invites Moses into this dynamic of prayer and intercession precisely for Moses to invite him to be faithful. And that's how the story is, and it doesn't solve the mystery at all, but it does call God's people to be involved in the act of intercessory prayer. Does that make sense? In as much as it can make sense, does that make sense? It's very powerful, I think. Closing paragraph of 10. So what should we draw from this? It's not because of your righteousness. Remember, this is what happened to you, and so I did intercessory prayer for you, and that worked out well because God's good. So now, what should you learn from this, Israel? What does Yahweh your God ask of you? This is not complicated. It's relationship. It's fairly intuitive. Fear Yahweh your God. Walk in his ways. Love him. Serve Yahweh your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul. Observe Yahweh's commands and decrees that I am giving you here today for your own good. He's just pulling out all the stops here. I mean, obedience is good for you, for goodness sakes. It's not arbitrary, Like, don't think about pink elephants. That's really hard, and it's arbitrary to tell someone to do that. But eat your vegetables. That is hard, but it's good for you, So that's the whole point, is that obedience leads to flourishing life. To Yahweh your God belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth, and everything in it. He's the transcendent creator over all things. Yet, Yahweh set his affection on you, which is supposed to make you be like, oh, you're supposed to chuckle or think that's amazing or something, because the whole point is that he's thinking about distant nebula that are awesome, but Yahweh is also actually thinking about you, of all things. Yahweh set his affection on your forefathers, and he loved them. He chose you, their descendants, out of all the nations. NIV has above all the nations. Any other translations there? Does everybody have above all the nations for verse 15? Of all peoples? Above all peoples. From all peoples. Okay, yes. Yes. Do we have this in English? So in Hebrew, if you want to say more than, in English, in Hebrew, you just use the word from. So he chose you from all the peoples. Literally, that's what it says. So it could mean above as more important than all the peoples. Does that seem to really flow from the story? Right? What seems the point is, out of all the peoples he took you, and you're kind of a miserable, faithless bunch, but I'm still doing this for you. So I think of or out of all the peoples, a little more faithful. Anyway, as it is to this day. So what should y'all do? Verse 16. Circumcise your hearts. There's a metaphor for you, right? Circumcise your hearts, therefore. Don't be stiff-necked any longer. Yahweh, your God, is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome. He doesn't show partiality. He doesn't accept bribes. So this is all a meditation on, once again, God having a chosen people. So he's the God of all of the nations. He's chosen you out of the nations. He doesn't play favorites. It's not like, oh, these people, they're so awesome. I'm going to treat them better than everyone else. No, in fact, what do the people of Israel actually need to do if it were even possible in the first place that would even make them worthy of true covenant relationship with Yahweh? And he uses this phrase, circumcise your hearts. You guys know, have you heard that phrase before? Circumcise your hearts. So we're referring back to a story here in Genesis 17, where Yahweh gave circumcision to the family of Abraham for the males, obviously, to mark the males and the multiplication of this covenant family, as it's a symbolic marker about the flourishing and growth of this family. Is connected to their covenant relationship with Yahweh. So it's this physical symbol on the men of the family that remind them of who they are and what this is all about. So here it turns into a metaphor, because circumcision obviously involves removal of skin. And so here, it's applied then to the heart. Your hearts have something so broken about them that there needs to be a removal. A removal. And here it's just of a part of your heart. The prophet Ezekiel is going to take this metaphor another step forward and be like, no, actually he needs to take out your heart completely and put in a new one. So, but this is the image here. If you're not going to be stiff-necked any longer, you need to have some kind of complete heart transformation. Well, how's that ever going to happen? So hold that in the back of your mind for till like August. Because he brings up that theme again in chapter 30, and we'll get there. Verse 18. This is the kind of God that Yahweh is. He doesn't just play to the rich and the powerful. Rather, he defends the cause of the fatherless, the widow. He loves the immigrant, giving them food and clothing. And you all, Israel, are to love those who are immigrants, because you used to be immigrants in Egypt. And you are the people that I've brought into covenant relationship with myself. So fear Yahweh, your God. Serve him. Hold fast to him. Take your oaths in his name. He is your praise. That's just worth a cup of tea to sit and think about. He is your God, the one who performed for you those great and awesome wonders you saw with your own eyes. Your forefathers went down to Egypt. They were 70 in all. But now, oh, look, God's made you as numerous as the stars in the sky. Yes, that's so good. What a great conclusion. I was thinking this morning, why does he end like that? But of course he ends like that. So your forefathers went down to Egypt. You're 70 in all. Yahweh has made you numerous as the stars in the sky. What is that? There's a story there. Numerous like the stars in the sky. Yeah, the first story of Yahweh making a covenant with Abraham. Genesis 15. Don't be afraid, Abraham. I'm your shield, your reward. What do you mean? I don't have any kids. I'm childless. I've got this guy Eliezer. He's really nice, but he's going to inherit my household. This man won't be your heir. A son of your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him up to look at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, this is how many your offspring will be. And Abraham believed Yahweh, which Israel never did in the Torah, and Yahweh credited it to Abraham as the status of tzedek. So it's this simple act of faith and trust, and Yahweh responds by granting him the status of tzedek and entering into a covenant relationship with him. And that covenant relationship is what drives Yahweh's decisions. And it's what creates an open space in Yahweh for God to invite his people to pray to him on behalf of the evil and the tragedy and the sorrow in God's world, and for God to actually do something about it, because he's made himself open to doing that. Deuteronomy 9 and 10. We should pray.